Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix with James Junkin
James Junkin, welcome to the Risk Matrix.
and myself, Dr. Martin. And we're here today with Jamie Brenner, and she's an insurance expert. So we're going to talk about insurance and risk, and she's also an advisor on procurement to Veriforce. But before we get into the show, I'm going to have James bring us in with a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Dr. Martin, big news. The Risk Matrix is on the move. We're headed to the Veriforce Select Client event in New Orleans, Louisiana at the Higgins Hotel, live from NOLA, baby, right across the street from the historic World War II museums. That means we're going to actually have a live guest and a live audience on May the 15th. May the 15th, live guests, live audience, have participation there. Like you remember Dr. Phil, Johnny Carson, live audience, going to be great. So our special guest will be Brent Kellekamp with Ogletree and Deacons, who's appeared on our podcast here, our video cast. And we're going to be discussing the legal risk associated with information security and cybersecurity. So we want to invite everyone that can to attend the Veriforce Select Client Series event in New Orleans, May 15th and 16th. And you can learn more about that by going to veriforce.com/NOLA-client-series. Hope to see everyone there, our first live event. Dr. Martin.
Thanks, James. And again, we have today Jamie Brenner, and she is an insurance expert. And as we all know, there's a lot of insurance requirements that go along with working on different sites, different industries, subcontracting people. And Jamie's here to kind of lead us through some of the pitfalls and some of the success stories that she's seen in the insurance realm and procurement, etc. So, James.
So, Jamie, welcome. You are the Senior Advisor for Procurement and Insurance, a longtime friend. I've worked with Jamie for many, many years, and she is the guru when it comes to insurance. Now, Dr. Martin and I are safety professionals. Usually we never want to try to get to a situation where we have to use our insurance, right? I'm fond of saying I don't want to find out whether my insurance works or not. But certainly insurance is a way to have a financial hedge against risk. So when you're talking to hiring clients about setting up insurance requirements and what the expectations are for contractors, tell me about that kind of conversation that you go through and what it is that you key on to make sure that they get the right amount of insurance coverage without overburdening the contractor with requirements they can't meet.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. This is exciting for me. This is a safety thing, so I'm excited to be involved. But no, from my standpoint, immediately when we're working with hiring clients, we get their MSAs, their master service agreements, their professional service agreements, any things with terms and conditions, to look at their insurance requirements to put their contractors in a category based off of the risk. That's not always the case, though. So sometimes we see hiring clients have everyone that's working for them needs to have, a $10 million excess umbrella policy. That includes your little grass cutters, to your fence erectors, to your drilling contractors, to those who are doing high-risk machinery work on site. And that's where those hiring clients start seeing their contractors bill them back in their rates for having to pay for those amount of coverages.
So you just don't want to say as a hiring client, I'm going to charge 10 million across the board. You kind of help them understand what the risk profile, certainly someone that's cutting grass, and I actually represent a one-person grass cutting company that works in a chemical plant. And he has to have appropriate insurance and third-party verification systems, supply chain risk management tools. But certainly we don't want to hit that guy with $10 million worth of insurance requirements, right?
Correct. So, there's it's a double-edged sword on the insurance side, because you have your third-party liabilities, such as your GL and your auto. that your excess is going to sit over. And then of course you have to worry about the workers' comp coverage for your employees and those getting hurt on site, because while you're charging them this much for all of those third-party liabilities, they're probably paying extra if they've had an injury with their workers' comp and their EMR. So, while you're hitting them from this side, they probably are getting hit from this side and their carriers. So you need to try to understand that the risk, put them in a category where the liability is associated with the risk of what they're doing. Sure, it's going to happen and there's going to be
So
problems
you're
on
sort of
site,
doing
but
what we're doing in some ways in safety. You're categorizing contractors as high risk, medium risk, maybe
Mhm.
low risk, right?
Yep. Yep. And the
So-
EMR kind of works, in conjunction with your TRIRs and your OSHA and all of that, kind of gives you like a picture of where they're trending. So it kind of does work together. So excited.
Okay,
Yes,
kinda cool.
we're all on the same page.
All on the same page. All on the same page. So when you're working in identifying with a hiring client, identifying contractors that are high risk,
Mhm.
how do you go about setting what amount of insurance coverage? I'm sure that's done by the hiring client, but you've been doing this a long time. Do you ever get asked to make recommendations as to how much coverage they need to require?
Yeah, so I usually try not to put it in the perspective of making recommendations. Now I'll look and do an analysis of where I think they have gaps, where they're leaving themselves open for liability pitfalls or something along those lines. And then I'll use like the industry best practices for categories or for risk associated. And then of course I look through NCCI. I'm constantly involved with that, where the classifications, there's loss costs every year. They show you where the claims came from and they show you where the risk is growing or where it's declining. So when I look at that information, it's better for me to go back to a hiring client. I try to tell them on an annual basis, let's review your MSA. Let's look at what you're charging your contractors and base it off of what the industry is seeing year over year.
Okay. So I always find this very, very interesting because this is another side of supply chain risk management that frankly I don't get involved in very much, right?
Mhm.
We get requirements, we figure out whether we can afford that amount of coverage, how much it's going to be, and if it's too much, we incorporate in the price and pass it back through. But from a hiring client's perspective, how difficult is it once they say, okay, we need 10 million, we need 5 million? A lot of contractors, their work with an operator or a hiring client evolves over time. So how do you make sure that, hey, we started out here with a 5 million, but really, man, we're out here now in a high risk because they liked our services have grown. How do you keep it evergreen so you don't end up with an incident that causes $25 million worth of damage and a couple of fatalities and you're underinsured?
Right. So it's always best to either have your MSA that if it is evergreen, you have I call it the if applicable situation, where if the excess liability is based off of the services that they're performing. So it doesn't necessarily say, hey, your MSA is written at 5 million and then something happens and that's all you're going to collect if it ends up in court or anything like that. Whereas if you put it on that basis of categories or, would put that disclaimer that the client has the ability to raise the limits that are required based off of the cost of doing business with that contractor, no matter what, no matter what the MSA may say. So there's those abilities. And then there's also where we have clients that I work with a lot that have, they have the MSA, which is like the backbone. But based off of the project and the job, they have statements of work, they have the SOWs in place and the limits are dictated by the job that they're working on at that particular time. So it's not necessarily to say that the MSA is the most important piece, although it is your Bible, because that's what I call it, because that's what you have to hold when you go in court for your whole, your harmless agreements and all of your indemnification. But the coverages can change because they should be attached as an exhibit instead of they should never affect the integrity of the MSA.
Okay.
So let me ask you this, because this came up today at one of our meetings, James and I were in. Speaking of keeping things evergreen, it sounds like for the most part, you and your team are the algorithm.
Mhm.
And by that I mean you are the people who are reviewing the requirements, whether or not things need to be improved or upgraded, or policies need to be more robust, or conditions changed, right?
Right.
But what is there a role, or is there a way that AI can be incorporated into this process of evergreening insurance requirements for large hiring clients, right? So you have, let's say Veriforce is a large hiring client, and they have, 50, 100 people that are, their sizes are changing, their scope of services are changing. Is there any talk of AI for that type of uh review? Or, I mean, is it really kind of a specialty thing that has to be, eyes to the page, like you're doing?
I mean, don't get me wrong, there are, companies that use optical character recognition to look at those COIs. But when I started with Veriforce in 2016, wow, that sounds like forever long ago. I came in as a specialty advisor to look at specialty insurance circumstances with our hiring clients, and it just kind of turned into building out an in-house insurance verifications team. Because we were, that was outsourced to a third party, and realizing that there were a lot of coverages and a lot of questions that our hiring clients had that we needed someone in-house to be able to answer for them. So when you're saying use, AI, yes, of course, you can use any type of technology to review a COI, because it's a document and they're pretty standard looking. However, we have seen where hiring clients have come to us and spoken with us about their processes that they have in place with who they're with now, or what they have in-house, and a comma is out of place, or a letter's transposed, or something reads a little different, because at the end of the day, insurance is not black and white, it's very gray. And I hear it all the time, the number of variances that people are trying to get for their insurance. Waiver, subrogation, additional insured are two endorsements I never recommend that a hiring client give a waiver or variance on. Whereas if you're trying to get a waiver or variance in other platforms or for other processes, you're having to get a variance for the entire policy. It's not just a piece of it, where if you have people reviewing that, they can pull it apart and look through it rather than just keeping it as one main coverage. Does that make sense? So pollution is definitely a
So
part
it's
of
a
it.
little nuanced. It's not
Yeah.
just
Caveats. Yeah. I mean, you have different
Right.
parts of the policy. You shouldn't have to have an end all be all and get rid of all of it. You should be able to take it apart. So I think that it is a thing. And as it starts as AI and that piece starts getting more and more robust and in the world of what we live, I just worry, because insurance changes all the time, the regulations, the laws by state, by coverage, as claims happen, the Marcel exception in Louisiana, all of those different things put new parameters in place based off of states and based off of incidents that happen that go to different courts, and they make determinations.
So the next question I have then is, how do you keep up with all that? I mean, obviously, you think computers probably can be scanning for this, but how does your team keep up with all of these changing regulations that are going on, and all of the case studies? Do you have a law department? I mean, it
Not
boggles my mind, because I'm like James, right? I hope my insurance never has to get used. I'm confused a lot when things change and I need a certain rider, and this, that, and the other. And it's not something that I can afford as a small business, but then to think about what you guys do, and the operation of several of these companies in all across the United States, across the world. Case studies happening all the time, laws changing. How do you keep up with it?
So, start out by saying that the insurance verification team is no longer my team. I do work hand in hand with them every day. I do have someone that I've brought in that I trained from when I started here, when I started that team, and she now works with me on the professional services team for insurance and procurement. So, there is probably a lot of information that I store. I've been in insurance for over 20 years, as an underwriter in the commercial side. And I can't say that it's something that you can just teach someone. Of course, there's tons of notes, there's tons of documents that we have, and and explaining to them as things start to develop, like cybersecurity, cyber liability, drone coverage, all of that stuff is over the past few years. So I teach them as it comes up. It's always going to be situational. It's never just going to be, hey, here's the rule, here's the law, and it's going to stick, because again, it's not black and white. So I work with that team all the time. Yes, they verify thousands of documents, sometimes on a daily basis, but a lot of hiring clients require general liability, auto, excess, and then workers' comp. And then you have your situations where you have your USL&H, you have some offshore coverages, you have some of your contractors' equipment. So a lot of it is on a case-by-case basis, but that's how great, the insurance section is configurable to the clients, what we use, because we can put those questions for specific clients. It's not end all be all. Everyone shares the information.
Told you she was a guru. Don't pay me for my time, pay me for my experience. That's what I'm hearing right there.
Well, right. Okay. So I was talking to the person who does my accounting, and he said, hey, if you knew somebody that can do what I do, I'd surely hire them. But here's what happens in the workforce is that there aren't people mentoring people in the way that you're talking about mentoring this young person and your team, that you have to have hands-on time to show them the way and the tools and the processes to make good decisions. And everybody wants to work at home these days. Those of us who are fortunate to do so, that's great. But you can't have that kind of. I know that I'm veering this off of the insurance, but I really think it speaks to the fact that when you're an expert in your field, in order for people to learn from an expert, you have to have daily, hands-on, mind meld kind of contact to teach them those tools, right? Because this goes back to the AI question, right? Even AI needs to be taught,
Yes.
right? And there's where AI is faulty, is that it doesn't think like the human mind. So let's, that'll be another discussion for another day. But it can incorporate your expertise,
Right.
and then the expertise compounded by your team, right? And so that to me just it goes to show that this is not something, and a lot of the things that we do is not something that you can just
Robot and
Right.
set it and forget it. Set it and
I
forget it.
imagine there's a lot of attention to detail that you have to have in working in your role at Veriforce and with the verifications team, and making sure that there's nothing missed on these certificate of insurances and coverages. Everybody's happy until we have an incident. And that's where Dr. Martin and I come in on the backside of these things, is post-incident. And then we're working with counsel. And we're going to talk about that here in just a moment when we get to the contractors. But I imagine it's a job that requires a lot of attention to detail.
Yes, so communication is super important, even internally at Veriforce, as well as with their, the customer success managers and their contacts at the client's office. Everyone has to be communicating, even if they're very siloed, from procurement, insurance to safety. All the information just needs to be available in one location. And I think that's why it's so important when you're talking to clients to make sure you have all the right people in the room, because even if it may not matter to you, someday it might.
It might.
Even if it's not, on the safety side or anything like that. But, Dr. Lindo, what you were saying about the team, just real quick to touch on that. We have a channel. We have a locked, secure channel in our internal chat at work. And if they have any questions, and I mean, I think there's like 3 or 4 young ladies back there that I trained when I started that department. Excuse me. So I know what they know. Now, as new people start to come in, of course, they're working with them, but they're going to also learn as they go. They'll start off small and then, get up to verifying those really intense coverages and things that they don't know right now. But it's all an experience, and it's all learning as you go. It's never all going to happen overnight. I mean, you guys know.
I'm going to make an insurance
I love it. Look, you're talking my old lady language, right? I like the you learn in a skill set and you jump a level until you become yourself, which is the expert, right? And that's why companies pay good money for experts, is because they took the time to take the tutelage over the years and to jump their levels up in order to come to an understanding that they can again then
Right.
exceed the master. So
Agree.
you're speaking my language. Sorry to interrupt you, James.
So it just depends.
Yes.
Isn't that right, Dr. Martin? One of her favorite sayings.
It
But
all just depends. Everything just depends.
little dad joke here. I guess we can say we're in good hands.
Oh, I
The
get it.
Veriforce verifications team and Jamie. But let me
Yeah.
give you a situation and shift focus here a little bit. A
Okay.
few years ago, I had a client, contractor, right, that had a subcontractor that worked for a hiring client. They're on the subcontractor is on the hiring client's premises, and the employee of the subcontractor had an accident that unfortunately ended up in a fatality.
Mhm.
The hiring client did not know that this subcontractor's employee or this subcontractor at all was working on their premises. The contractor did not have a COI naming the contractor as additional insured, and come to find out the sub didn't even have workers' compensation for the employee. And we're in a fatality situation. How does that happen, Jamie? How did we get to that point?
So every MSA should always have a downstream clause to cover subcontractors, independent contractors, temporary labor, leased employee, anything that when a contractor is working for a hiring client should always have that in their MSA. The subcontractor clause is important because it requires everything in that MSA to flow down. And they call it a downstream clause because it, the saying, I'm not going to say it, but it rolls downhill, right?
Yeah.
So,
Everywhere.
so that's why that is always a conversation. Like, I'm not an attorney. I work with lots of attorneys. I do have MSAs, and samples that I've seen developed over years that I will share out with hiring clients if they need to see certain clauses, just to show them how they're developing year over year and how things are changing. But when you get to the point of it, they're having subcontractors on site, by all means, contractor management. I mean, do you use subcontractors? Yes. Do you have an MSA in place with your subcontractors? Yes or no? Well, if you don't, are you collecting COIs? Because they need to have their own coverage, because then it's coming back the third party action. Most GL companies excluded explicitly out of any of their policies because they know what it means. It means that if somebody's on the site, an employee is on site, and they file a workers' comp claim, and even if that claim is covered, if it isn't to their expectations for what they're going to get in indemnity payments, they can go back to another party and jump them, basically action over to the general contractor or the hiring client and file third party damages to them.
So
And it has to be in that MSA is what, the subcontractor clause, and covering that third party action, saying that you will not come back no matter what. You're going to go to the contractor if you're a sub. You're not coming to
Right.
me.
I understand a lot of times in the MSAs between contractors and hiring clients, there's a lot of indemnity language. There's a lot of hold harmless language. Where I see the gap is there's not a lot of that between a contractor and a small subcontractor.
Mhm.
And subcontractors sometimes are necessary to perform very specialty work, but the legalities of insurance and while we're still running a business, and the contractual language and things that you find that happen in larger companies with contractors, because those larger companies have an insurance department. They have Jamie advising them. They have a legal department. That's often not present in a company the size with 150 employees. That's a mom and pop company. So what do those companies need to do that are contractors to make sure they're protected by insurance from their subcontractors?
So I'm just going to go in here and give an example, right?
Okay.
what happens when you have some of these small mom and pops, and I'm going to go smaller than that, James, because out here in the East, we see a lot of construction work going on, and they're like family-owned companies, 7, 8 people, right? How do you track when they drop their insurance? Or their insurance lapses, or because I've seen in subcontracting systems or in contractor verification systems that you put in your insurance and then it never gets, there's no check, right, until the next year when they ask for a new certificate. I
Right.
mean, what happens when they stop paying, and does the downstream clause even work, or upstream, or
And the
any of
downstream
this stuff?
clause, it definitely works in an MSA from, for contractors and subcontractors. The problem is, it's just like you guys just said, you're running them out of business. Because yes, you can't get blood from a turnip. You're literally taking them for every penny they have at that point because they didn't have the insurance in place. But you as a contractor, not you, but as a contractor, it's your job, if you're using subs, to make sure that they have what they need. And you make sure that they're giving you a COI for, or any type of insurance documentation necessary with you listed as a certificate holder and at least an additional insured. The waiver of subrogation, that's a different conversation, but the additional insured at least puts you as a named insured on their policy so that you can have the same benefits that they have. But at the end of the day, it also protects you from the little mom and pops that may not have the robust safety plan or drug and alcohol. They may not be using the greatest of the great to come out and do their work. But if you're going to put a confidence in them as a contractor to use them, then you need to make sure that you're helping them to mature as a sub or as a contractor and show them the way they need to go. It's not to say that hiring clients shouldn't have more of a process in place to know when their subcontractors are using subs. But that's kind of like where we have we have a subcontractor section and we have subcontractor management, and it kind of shows you who is the bad eggs if you're using subs, or if you're a hiring client and your contractors are using subs. So there's different ways to look at it, but at the end of the day, it's the hiring client and the contractor who need to put something in place. If the hiring client has it in place, great, check. Okay, contractor, do you have an MSA or you have some sort of agreement or even a one-page term and conditions in place? If you don't, well, guess what? Then you're taking on all that responsibility for them at that point. Whether the state says you have to have the coverage or not, because I hear that a lot, especially in like the great state of Texas, workers' comp is not required by the state, but you should require your contractors and subcontractors to have it, because, oh, well, it's just me and my brother. Well, guess what? Your brother gets hurt and somebody's got to pay for his hurt, his injuries and his indemnity. Somebody's got to pay it. And so whether it's your brother or not, he's going to come back and he's going to go after someone for those damages. So it's important regardless to make sure you have them covered.
Well, I think Dr. Martin brought up a good point and kind of went along with my previous question, which is the smaller the organization, the more important to me it is to have a system like Veriforce in place that's managing COIs, right?
Yeah.
As a contractor. So we know when someone quits paying and their policy's canceled.
Yes.
Or we know when it's time to renew policies. Too many times what I find is somebody comes along and says, hey, I need a COI from you. And they're just happy to get the document. They don't understand what it says. They see that, they've got some insurance, but they only have $1 million worth of insurance, but the potential exposure may be 5 to 10 million. Hey, contractor, if your sub causes that much damage, you're going to pay whatever the gap is.
Yes.
Whatever the gap is. And here's what I found interesting in a lot of cases we've worked here lately involving contractors. Sometimes when they are working on a project, there may be 10 or 12 different legal entities that own that project that end up being defendants in gross negligence suits, wrongful death suits. And guess what? Guess who's paying for that under those hold harmless agreements, those indemnity agreements? The contractor is. So contractors have got to really, from a risk standpoint, understand what the expectations are from their hiring clients and what they need to protect their own entity from their subs. And
Yes,
I think Veriforce provides a great service, and your department in particularly, in assisting contractors and not just hiring clients, but contractors in managing their subs and getting the right insurance coverage to protect that contractor, as well as keeping up with it.
yeah, so we do, we get a lot of cancellation, reinstatement, a lot of those documents. So we do update that across all of the insurance sections for all of the hiring clients, for all the contractors. So if a contractor, has XYZ hiring client listed as a certificate holder, and that certificate holder is going to be notified when those policies cancel, well, they're coming to us and we'll be able to update that across all of them. So if you're a contractor and you have subcontractors, it makes sense if you were doing it the same way, basically acting as a hiring client in the sense of managing your subcontractors. And then everyone, you can start to see a trend. Where we see right now is, we have contractors who have their subs in, in Veriforce and Compliance Pro, and they use those subcontractors in that capacity as a subcontractor. But what they don't know is that having over 80,000 contractors and subcontractors in our platform, you're using them as a sub, but we also see the whole picture of that subcontractor because they're probably working for a hiring client in the full capacity somewhere else.
Right.
While you're only looking at this part of it, do you put your head on the pillow at night easy and know that you have everything in place with that sub? Because we know that we have that information, 90% of the time, because we see them in that full picture. But a lot of times from the hiring client standpoint, I can tell you this: contractors are using subs and hiring clients are paying contractors the rates as if, for the subs and everything, and it's all getting paid downstream. A lot of times hiring clients don't realize that they can use these contractors and use their subs as full-on straight contractors and get an agreement with them. And it really helps those subs start to achieve some of the goals to become more mature companies, helping them get those drug and alcohol plans in place, helping them develop a better process for their employees' safety, verifications, all of that stuff. So we kind of start seeing a lot of that as well. And it's becoming pretty popular now, where hiring clients are just going to start going straight to the subs. And it also helps them on that, on that safety front.
It's always cheaper to cut out the middleman.
It is.
But that's why it's super important, I think, to utilize a service like we have at Veriforce. With experts like you, Jamie. Insurance is super complex, super complicated. It varies by state. We don't have time to get into workers' comp, workers' comp being the exclusive remedy a lot of time for workers that are injured, but they're always, in Dr. Martin's words, it just depends, right?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, we're finding out if other aspects of our insurance works or not.
Yes.
Hopefully, we're all dedicated to Veriforce's mission, which is getting workers home safe from high hazard jobs, and we never have to use our insurance. But if someone's got questions, Jamie, about insurance, either they're a current client of Veriforce, either a contractor or a hiring client, or someone that's just listening to our podcast here on Spotify or YouTube, how do we get in touch with an expert like you?
You can email me. It's Jamie.Brenner, one N, BRENER, at veriforce.com, or you can call me. My direct line is 966-0536. And happy to answer any questions anyone has. I believe in the mission of Veriforce, and I've seen super success with hiring clients that have come on green, contractors that have come on green, not having any understanding on where they need to go next. And between our safety experts like you guys, as well as, what I do, as you guys called me an expert, I truly believe that we're making a difference in the world of contractors. I really do.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Folks listening to our podcast, again, dad joke, you're in good hands. You're in good hands with Jamie and the Veriforce verification and insurance team as part of our expert services group. Thank you for coming on, Jamie, and thank you for those that are listening to our podcast on a weekly basis. Every Tuesday, a new one drops. Tell them what to do, Dr. Martin.
I want you to hit that like button, smash that follow button, get to us in the chat, send us some comments, make sure you listen. Every Tuesday episode drops. I know I posted on my LinkedIn, so does James. Veriforce has it on their YouTube channel, but we really want you to follow us and listen to the conversation. Tell us when we're right and wrong. We're often right, but every once in a while we're wrong. And as James says, we're in good hands, I guess, with Jamie. So Jamie, thank you so much for coming on, and keep listening to the Risk Matrix.
And y'all keep bringing
Thank you,
those
guys.
workers home safe from high hazard jobs.